What you're about to see is the most shocking emotional story that completely changed one woman's life forever. At exactly 3:17 a.m. on a cold Tuesday night, Rebecca Thompson opened her front door to grab a package she'd been expecting. But what she found instead would leave her speechless and questioning everything she thought she knew about her own family. This isn't just another story about a baby found on a doorstep. This true story has a twist so unbelievable that when you hear who actually left that innocent child there, you'll understand why Rebecca's world turned completely upside down in that single moment. Stay with me because what happens next will shock you to your core. Before we dive into this incredible true story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because stories like this one don't come around often. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Rebecca Thompson had always been a light sleeper, but that Tuesday night in October, something felt different. She lived alone in her modest two-story house in suburban Denver, a place she'd called home for the past 15 years. At 34, Rebecca worked as a nurse at the local children's hospital, dedicating her life to caring for others while secretly yearning for a family of her own. The sound that woke her wasn't the usual neighborhood noise she'd grown accustomed to. It wasn't the Andersons' dog barking or the teenagers racing their cars down Maple Street. This was different. Softer. Almost human. Rebecca glanced at her bedside clock. 3:17 a.m. She'd been expecting a package from her sister Melissa, who lived 3 states away. Melissa had mentioned sending some old family photos and documents that their late mother had left behind. Rebecca thought maybe the delivery driver had dropped it off in the middle of the night. Wrapping her robe around herself, Rebecca made her way downstairs. The house creaked with familiar sounds, but as she approached the front door, she heard it again. That soft, rhythmic sound that had pulled her from sleep. When she opened the door, Rebecca's heart stopped. There, nestled in a wicker basket lined with soft pink blankets, was a baby. A real, living, breathing baby. The infant couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, with tiny fingers that gripped the air, and the softest whimpering sounds that had somehow reached Sarah's ears through 2 floors and solid walls. "Oh my God," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible in the crisp autumn air. She looked frantically up and down the street, expecting to see someone, anyone, who could explain this impossible situation, but the neighborhood remained eerily silent. Rebecca's nursing instincts immediately kicked in. She gently lifted the basket and brought it inside, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from the overwhelming realization that someone had trusted her with the most precious gift imaginable. The baby was bundled in what appeared to be handmade blankets, soft and warm despite the October chill. Pinned to the blanket was a small white envelope with Rebecca's name written in careful cursive handwriting. But before she could read the note, the baby opened her eyes, deep brown eyes that seemed far too knowing for someone so young. In that moment, Rebecca felt something shift inside her heart. This wasn't just any baby. This felt like destiny. Rebecca had been a pediatric nurse for over a decade. She'd held thousands of newborns, comforted countless families, and witnessed every emotion the human heart could experience in those hospital corridors. But this was different. This baby wasn't just another patient or another family's bundle of joy. This baby had been brought specifically to her doorstep. The baby seemed content in Rebecca's arms, as if she belonged there. Rebecca found herself whispering soft reassurances, her voice instinctively dropping to the gentle tone she used with her most fragile patients. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now. I've got you." But even as she spoke those comforting words, 1,000 questions raced through Rebecca's mind. Who was this baby? Why had someone chosen her doorstep specifically? And most importantly, who would be desperate enough to leave their child with a complete stranger in the middle of the night? Rebecca carefully opened the envelope with one hand, while supporting the baby with the other. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper with a message that made her blood run cold. The note was brief, but its words would haunt Rebecca for weeks to come. "Rebecca, this is Grace Claire. She belongs with you now. I can't explain everything, but please know this wasn't an easy decision. Take care of her like I know you will. Look for the truth in the places you'd least expect to find it. Someone who loves you both. Rebecca read the note 3 times, each reading bringing more questions than answers. Grace Clare. The name felt familiar, but Rebecca couldn't place why. The handwriting was elegant, almost old-fashioned, suggesting someone with formal education or perhaps an older generation. But the most puzzling part was the phrase, "someone who loves you both." How could the person who left this baby claim to love them both if Rebecca had never met this child before tonight? Rebecca's first instinct as a medical professional was to call the authorities, but something in the tone of that note made her pause. Look for the truth in the places you'd least expect to find it. What could that possibly mean? Instead of calling 911 immediately, Rebecca decided to examine everything more carefully. The basket was clearly handmade, woven with a technique that reminded her of something from her childhood. The blankets were equally crafted with care, soft cotton with delicate embroidered edges that spoke of hours of loving work. Most intriguingly, tucked beneath the blankets, Rebecca discovered a small silver locket. It was antique, clearly valuable, and when she opened it, her heart nearly stopped beating. Inside the locket was a photograph so old it had faded to sepia tones. It showed 2 young women standing side by side, both with the same distinctive smile and the same deep brown eyes that Rebecca recognized immediately. One of the women looked remarkably like Rebecca herself, while the other was unfamiliar, but shared enough similar features to suggest they were related. Rebecca rushed to her bedroom and pulled out the box of family photos her sister Melissa had sent months earlier. She'd been meaning to organize them, but had been too busy with work. Now, with Grace Clare sleeping peacefully in a makeshift crib Rebecca had created from laundry baskets and soft towels, she spread the old photographs across her dining room table. What she found made her question everything she thought she knew about her family history. Buried among photos of family gatherings and holiday celebrations, Rebecca discovered several pictures she'd never seen before. Photos of her grandmother, Dorothy Thompson, as a young woman. And standing beside her in multiple photographs was the same unfamiliar woman from the locket. The resemblance between this mystery woman and baby Grace Clare was undeniable. The same delicate features, the same distinctive eye shape, even the same tiny dimple in the left cheek that Rebecca remembered her grandmother having. Rebecca's hands were shaking as she turned over one of the photographs. In her grandmother's careful handwriting were the words, "Dorothy and Catherine Thompson, sisters, 1962. Catherine Thompson." Rebecca had never heard that name before in her life, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Catherine Thompson, whoever she was, looked like she could be Rebecca's twin from another era. And if the baby's features were any indication, Grace Clare was somehow connected to this mysterious family member that Rebecca's family had never mentioned. Rebecca spent the next several hours going through every photograph, every document, every piece of family history she could find. What she discovered was a pattern of missing information, gaps in family stories, and photographs with people carefully cut out or faces deliberately obscured. Someone had been systematically hiding Catherine Thompson from the family history. As the sun began to rise, Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling the authorities, she called the one person who might have answers. Her 87-year-old great-aunt Helen, who lived in a nursing home in Phoenix and was the family's unofficial historian. "Aunt Helen," Rebecca said when the elderly woman answered her phone, "I need to ask you about Catherine Thompson." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that Rebecca thought the call had been disconnected. When Aunt Helen finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "How do you know that name, child?" Rebecca explained about finding the baby, about the photographs, about the mysterious note. As she spoke, she could hear Aunt Helen crying softly on the other end of the line. "I wondered when this day would come," Aunt Helen said finally. "Catherine was your grandmother's twin sister. They were inseparable until the family made a terrible decision that we've all regretted for 60 years. But the resemblance was unmistakable. Elena Martinez, whoever she was, looked like she could be Sarah's twin from another era. And if the baby's features were any indication, Emma Rose was somehow connected to this mysterious family member that Sarah's family had never mentioned. Sarah spent the next several hours going through every photograph, every document, every piece of family history she could find. What she discovered was a pattern of missing information, gaps in family stories, and photographs with people carefully cut out or faces deliberately obscured. Someone had been systematically hiding Elena Martinez from the family history. As the sun began to rise, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling the authorities, she called the one person who might have answers, her 87-year-old great-aunt Rose, who lived in a nursing home in Phoenix and was the family's unofficial historian. "Aunt Rose," Sarah said when the elderly woman answered her phone, "I need to ask you about Elena Martinez." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that Sarah thought the call had been disconnected. When Aunt Rose finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "How do you know that name, child?" Sarah explained about finding the baby, about the photographs, about the mysterious note. As she spoke, she could hear Aunt Rose crying softly on the other end of the line. "I wondered when this day would come," Aunt Rose said finally. "Elena was your grandmother's twin sister. They were inseparable until the family made a terrible decision that we've all regretted for 60 years. What Aunt Helen revealed next would shatter everything Rebecca thought she knew about her family's past and explain the shocking truth behind who had left baby Grace Claire on her doorstep. "Catherine was sent away when she was 17, Aunt Helen began, her voice heavy with decades of guilt and regret. "She fell in love with a young man from a different background, and your great-grandparents couldn't accept it. This was 1963, child. Times were different then. Catherine had been pregnant when the family forced her to leave. They told the community she had gone to care for a sick relative in another state. But the truth was far more heartbreaking. Catherine's parents had given her an ultimatum: give up the baby for adoption and never contact the family again, or leave and never return. Catherine chose love over family approval. She disappeared from their lives completely, taking with her not just herself, but the grandchild that Rebecca's great-grandparents would never acknowledge. Your grandmother Dorothy never got over it," Aunt Helen continued. "She tried to find Catherine for years, but Catherine had changed her name, started a new life. Dorothy died still wondering if her twin sister was alive. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in Rebecca's mind. Catherine Thompson had built a life somewhere else, had children, grandchildren, maybe even great-grandchildren, and somehow Grace Claire was connected to that hidden branch of the family tree. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. "Rebecca," Aunt Helen said, her voice trembling. "Catherine never stopped loving this family. She kept track of all of us over the years. She knew when Dorothy died, when your parents passed away, when you became a nurse. She's been watching over this family from a distance for 60 years. Rebecca felt the room spinning around her. "Aunt Helen, are you telling me that Catherine is still alive?" "Not just alive, child. Catherine Thompson lives in Denver. She's been living 20 minutes away from you for the past 15 years. The truth hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Catherine Thompson, her grandmother's twin sister, had been quietly watching Rebecca's life unfold from a distance. She'd known about Rebecca's struggles with infertility, her longing for a family, her dedication to caring for children at the hospital. And somehow, Catherine had been taking care of baby Grace Claire. But why now? Rebecca asked, looking down at the sleeping infant in her arms. Why would she leave the baby with me now? Aunt Helen's voice broke as she delivered the final piece of the puzzle. Because Catherine is dying, sweetheart. She has pancreatic cancer, and the doctors say she only has a few weeks left. Grace Claire is her great-granddaughter, and Catherine's granddaughter died in a car accident 2 months ago. Catherine is the only family that baby has left. The emotional weight of this revelation nearly brought Rebecca to her knees. This wasn't just a random act of desperation. This was a dying woman's final act of love, bringing together the family that had been torn apart 60 years earlier. Catherine Thompson had spent 6 decades loving her family from a distance, and in her final weeks, she'd chosen to heal the wounds of the past by ensuring that Grace Claire would be raised by someone who would love her unconditionally. She chose you, "Rebecca," Aunt Helen whispered, "because she knows you have the same heart that Dorothy had. The heart of a mother, even without children of your own." 3 days later, Rebecca found herself sitting in a quiet hospice room, holding Grace Clare while facing the woman who had been watching over her family for 60 years. Catherine Thompson was frail but beautiful, with the same deep brown eyes that Rebecca recognized from the locket, and the same gentle smile that had been hidden from family photographs for decades. "I'm sorry for the shock," Catherine said, her voice weak but filled with warmth. "I didn't know how else to bring our family back together." Rebecca couldn't find words. She simply reached out and took Catherine's hand, feeling the connection of blood and love that had transcended 6 decades of separation. Catherine lived for 2 more weeks, long enough to see Grace Clare smile, long enough to share stories of the family Rebecca had never known existed, and long enough to heal wounds that had festered for 3 generations. When Catherine passed away peacefully in her sleep, she left behind not just a baby for Rebecca to raise, but a restored sense of family history and the knowledge that love can survive any obstacle, even decades of forced separation. Rebecca legally adopted Grace Clare, giving her not just a home but a legacy. The little girl would grow up knowing the story of her great-great-grandmother Catherine, the woman brave enough to choose love over acceptance and strong enough to heal a family from beyond the grave. This emotional story reminds us that family isn't always about the people we grow up with. Sometimes family is about the people who choose us, who love us from a distance, and who make sacrifices we never even know about until it's almost too late. Rebecca's life changed completely that night at 3:17 a.m., but not in the way she could have ever imagined. She'd spent years wanting a child, never knowing that the child who needed her most was already connected to her through bonds stronger than time itself. If this true story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear about the incredible ways families can find each other. Subscribe for more emotional stories like this one, because sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin in the most unexpected ways. And remember, you never know who might be watching over you from a distance, loving you in ways you can't even imagine. Family isn't always about the people we know. Sometimes it's about the people who know us better than we know ourselves. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.